deductions and net income is what we're looking at. Now, these two ideas, just like we've seen before, they sound like two things, but they're really, really one. Okay? So, net income is the first thing, it's the easiest thing to start with. The idea is that you get paid some amount, right? It's like, I have this wage, I have this salary. That's what we call gross income, right? So, net income is what's left after, I'm even going to write this. What's left after expenses and other kinds of money that you pretty much have to spend. So what is left after expenses are removed from gross income. And we're familiar with this language of gross and net, not just for money, but like, you buy a can of, a fish or something like that, a can of tuna, and there's the gross weight, which includes the can, which is a substantial weight, and then there's the net weight, which is the actual fish inside, the actual weight, right? In the same way, net income is the actual amount of money that you can actually spend or save, you can do stuff with it. As opposed to, like, gross income is much too large. A lot of that you will never get access to. Like, you get taxed out of it, or it'll be deducted in other ways. Now, there's a whole bunch of different deductions that reduce your net income. And I'll tell you about the main ones, the big categories. The first one is superannuation. So I mentioned this before, this is the government's way of saying, yeah, we think you're going to suck at saving for retirement, so we're going to force you to, right? They take a little slice of money off every time you get paid, and it goes into this big lump sum that you cannot access until you're at whatever age, 65 I think. Okay. Superannuation? Yeah, it's old. They're not that old. 65, it comes surprisingly quick.
But what about if you want to retire early? Do they just not give a crap?
Okay, well, so if you want to, if you have enough money to stop working earlier, like they still don't give you access to that money until you hit 65, which is why it's called, like superannuation is often connected to this idea of the age pension, right? They're not the same thing, but it's the same idea in that, look, we want you to make sure the wonders of modern medicine, and now that we live for ages and ages, so we need to make sure there's enough money to survive for that. Okay? So the government will hold on; they won't let you have it.
What if you just passed away or you died? Does that money
Yeah,
go to the
where
government?
would
Yeah. Now I should say that's a great point to mention. Superannuation is a bit of a funny thing. You might have seen ads on TV for like superannuation funds. So there's like Australian Super and all these different people who say, yeah, we'll look after your money, we'll invest it for you for 20, 30 years. The funny thing is that you have to be really careful with this when you guys start working, or if you're already working. Different employers, like say the Department of Education, right? They pretty much all go with, I think it's First State Super. That's their company. They'll all go there, okay? But if I were to leave and go into some other industry or go work for a private school or something like that, then my super is not going to go to that company anymore. It's going to go to some other guys. So now my money is in two separate places, and lots of people don't ever bother like trying to track down their money, and then they get to the end of their life and they're like, where's all my money gone? And it's an enormous, terrible paper trail to follow. Okay? If someone passes away, then access to that money is going to pass to next of kin. But again, because of like crazy paperwork and where did this money go anyway, sometimes that money just gets lost into the system. Much to the happiness of superannuation funds, right? In fact, right now, literally, I know some people, and what they're trying to work out is trying to transfer property into someone else's name, because if it stays in the name of the person it's currently in, that person has no like children, no dependents, nothing like that. So that money's just going to kind of disappear, or it might pass the next of kin who aren't going to know how to access it because it's complicated. Okay, so that's why it pays to really think about all of these types of things now. All right, so we said superannuation. Another pretty much compulsory cost that we're all going to have is health insurance, and we're going to talk about that in detail in a minute. So health insurance, and the other one that I had was, oh yeah, that's right, membership fees for things like trade unions or other institutions which, as part of your job, you're pretty much required to be part of. So for instance, I have to be an institutional member of the Board of Studies and Teaching and Educational Standards. Like, to actually be employable in a New South Wales school, I have to be a member there. And that costs me the sweet privilege of being part of that and working, costs me $100 a year, right? Every year I have to pay that. If I don't pay it, I can't work, it's illegal. So therefore, like, that's an expense that I'm never going to be able to use that money. It's part of my gross income, but it leaves my hands as soon as I get it, okay? So that's why these are what we call deductions. They get taken out of your gross income, and you get left with the net, okay? Now, I'll just quickly show you if you have a look at 1G at the first few questions, they're all about just working out what net income is. They're like, here's a gross income, and here are some deductions. Can you subtract? Like that's all it is. So I'm not going to devote any time to that. You can work it out on your own. What I want to talk about properly is something like this. Okay. Now this is actually really detailed. So if you have, you probably want to put this as its own subheading of health insurance. I'm going to do most of my writing over there because it'll be easier for me to label stuff. A lot of the maths that's related to stuff like deductions is not just like what is the deduction, but what do you get for your deduction, and also, excuse me, how much you're going to pay for that and on what basis. Okay, it's a little bit like when we were working out wages and salaries, and it was kind of like, oh, how much per week, how much per year, how much per like annually, all that kind of thing. So have a look at this table for me. There's a lot of information here, and I want to try and unpack it. So I'm going to do some labeling here, but you might want to put this under your heading of health insurance so you don't do graffiti on your textbook. Okay, first thing I want to point out, you will notice, if you can see this table in front of you as well, the first thing I want to talk about is these adjectives here: top, intermediate, and basic. Okay, so what these refer to, if you want to put a little subheading, right? These are levels of cover. Okay, so basic hospital, intermediate hospital, or top hospital. I'll talk about excess in a moment. What they refer to is, look, we're all going to go to hospital in our lives, right? What you're going to go for, some things are very, very common, very common. Other things are a bit less common, and so it's like, well, I think I'm healthy enough and I'm not going to have like a knee operation or like have a hernia removed or something like that. So basic, intermediate, and top refers to, all right, if you go into the hospital, what do you want to be covered for? Like, are you willing to just be covered for all the basic stuff, which is like, if I have an asthma attack, or if I just got uncontrollable bleeding and I want to head into emergency, all those kinds of basic things which they could happen to anyone, okay? Or you might want to pay more, it costs more as you go up, pay more, but that means when you get into hospital, you'll have to pay less in order to actually get treatment, okay? So it's like, there might be some really strange, like, I don't know, maybe you have you were born with like a cardiological disorder or something like that, and it's quite uncommon, right? So what will happen is you're going to maybe need intermediate or top cover in order to be like, I arrive at the hospital and I want a specialist, a cardiologist, to have a look at what's going on. It's going to be really expensive, right? You can also, things like obstetrics and gynecology, they also fit on this, like, oh, am I going to have a child in the next 5 years? Then I want to make sure that I have the cover. That will mean when I get into the hospital, I'll be covered for that kind of thing. So that's what these levels of cover are: top, intermediate, and basic. And you can see, just have a look here at these parts here. These are the different costs that are associated. So as you go up, maybe if you want to get into hospital and like have your own private room, like rather than a ward, which is with 4 other people, you're going to need to pay more cover for that kind of thing.